Okay, I think that's it. So we have around 10 attendees today. I think we can get started. Can you hear me well? Can I get the confirmation?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Alex. I'm a software engineer on Argo CD, and today is our contributors meeting. So the goal of the meeting is to, I guess, answer questions and discuss issues. And we had some agenda for this meeting. So let me share my screen. I'm going to show agenda here. Yeah, so I think during last meeting, I promised to prepare a small presentation about Argo CD UI development. And I hope it will take like 10, 15 minutes. And I guess there will be questions and we can take them offline. And we had several, proposed topics. So we're going to talk about pushing images to GitHub container registry, writing tests, and then the feature request and the PR from Peter. And one more question about creating documentation for using different clusters, I guess, during development. Okay, and I hope my part won't take more than 10 minutes. So hopefully we can discuss all of them. Okay, so since I'm first, let me get started. I prepared a small presentation, which is kind of just a script of what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to publish that presentation so it can be used later, if necessary. Okay, so the topic is Argo CD UI development. And first, I wanted to just go through the basics, the stack which we use for developing the UI. So we use kind of two languages, I would say, TypeScript and Sass, which is fancy JavaScript and CSS, fancy versions of these two languages. And we heavily use React, so pretty much everything is based on React. And we use two components, React Router, React Form. And kind of heads up that I think both the versions of these components are pretty old. And so that's important because the documentation might be different for the latest versions, but it is what it is. This is what we use right now. And there are a couple more components which worth mentioning. One is RxJS, and I will talk a little bit later, more about it. And foundation sites, we use just the CSS part of it, and we use some. So the most important piece which we use is a grid framework, and that's the most important components. And before we talk about these components more, I wanted to quickly go through the directory structure which we have in the application. And that's important to know just, so you can understand how to navigate in the code. And because Argo UI is not a giant application, so it's fairly simple. I was able to fit the whole directory structure, the top level, into a screen, which is very convenient. And yeah, so here we have kind of three most important pieces. The entry point of the application, bunch of modules, and I call module as separate kind of part of an application which is not related to other parts. So for example, we have a module applications, and it refers to Argo CD application. We have module help, which just consists of a single screen, the help screen. We have login, which includes, admin login, SSS login, and settings, which has repositories, clusters, and so on. So the application entry point, what it does, it bootstrap React router and configure routes for different modules. And each module is loaded asynchronously when user navigates to the appropriate route. And this is also important because code is loaded asynchronously, it doesn't make sense to reference a component from, let's say, settings in application module. And because in this case, application would load the whole settings module, and that would be a waste of JavaScript. Basically, the end user would have to load too much JavaScript when navigates to applications. And to solve that problem, we have last piece here, which is shared. So here we just have a shared components which can be reused across all four application modules. And maybe I should pause here. Like, does it make sense so far? Any questions? Okay, so hopefully it's clear.
So Alex, a few of us, we joined from the other Zoom link, just letting you know, 4 or 5 of us.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
saw there were messages in Slack.
Yeah, I think some of us missed it, but somebody found it and was in the other meeting, told us, let's not
Yeah.
go to it. So we just joined in, just letting you know.
Okay, so yeah, it will be recorded. Basically, I guess everyone who joined late will have to watch the recording. And I see the message
that's
from
fine.
Ed. Yeah, sorry, let me. Okay. All right, so I think I should move on just for the to save time. Okay. Next, kind of, I think, important question, I guess it's related to any React application. How do we manage state? So, and Argo UI, it went through a transition. We started from using Redux, and then after like a month of dealing with Redux, we realized it's just too complex for Argo CD. Basically, Argo CD UI is not Facebook, and we don't have so much of shared UI state. And then after moving back and forth, we just landed on just plain React state management API. And the recent React upgrade introduced hooks, which really make things better. So if you're working on a new component, it is really we're encouraging you to use hooks if possible, as opposed to set state API. Plus, we have two components. One is data loader, which I'm going to talk about right now, and React form. So these two components are kind of specialized on managing state for two use cases. And the first use case is asynchronous data loading, which happens a lot in Argo CD. And here's the use case. Basically, every page gets some input from user, and that input is usually in the URL. So in this example, so this code snippet gets the name of a user account from the URL, and then it loads data asynchronously. And what could happen is that user might change the URL, and we're supposed to kind of stop loading, stop previous request, and then issue the new request and load asynchronously data for different account, or request might fail and we're supposed to show error message and retry button, or a request might just take too much time and we should show progressing the message which says, hey, I'm loading data to the user. And it is kind of, if you try to do it on each and every page, you would have to write a lot of duplicated code, and data loader kind of just encapsulates that logic. And let's kind of go through that component line by line. So the first line is component declaration. So here we're saying we're using data loader, and we provide two parameters here. One is input, and input is typically input of your function which loads the data. And the idea of having that parameters separately is so that data loader knows when input changes. So if it detects that input property has changed, it will execute appropriate actions. it could interrupt in-flight loading request, or it can, create a new request. So, and the second parameter is the request implementation. So basically load is a function pointer which takes input from the input parameter and returns the either promise or observable. And I will talk about observable later. And I guess most likely everyone here knows what the promise is. Everyone here who does UI development. In this case, we get a load returns a promise, and promise eventually either fail or returns account data. And then finally, the children parameter of data loader will receive an account and render something. Yeah, so it's basically, and I know it's not, my description is maybe not fully kind of complete, but the good thing is that there is open source library, which is pretty much does exactly the same. And that library is actively developed. It's called React Async. And this library was created after we created data loader. So, and I think the ideal solution would be to eventually migrate to that library because there is whole community, there is nice documentation, and library keep evolving. Yeah, so that's kind of for your information. If something is unclear here, I'm pretty sure the documentation here can help. Okay, any questions about this part? Okay, I hope it doesn't mean I'm talking like nothing is clear. Hopefully that means everyone understood how data loader works. Yeah, and
I'll just quickly check with some of the folks that I know usually are into the UI. I think Regina, JD, Tim, does this look good for you so far?
Yeah, I get it.
At least, okay. I want to make sure at least, use case is clear. The idea is that we were forced to create that component because it just literally on each and every page, like 3-4 times, you have to load data synchronously, and then you have exact same set of issues, like how to communicate to user that something went wrong, or it's just taking too much time. So yeah, cool. So that part takes care of loading and managing state during asynchronous data loading. And then next very common use case is input state management or like form state management. And we use two libraries. It's not really visible from here, but this is the link, and it leads to a React form component. And that component, it had like quite a history. So it was created first, and then it was deprecated, and then I think it kind of get back to life again. So, but it changed a lot, and we are on version 2, which is kind of quite old. And this is just a heads up for you. So if you want to read about the form library which we use, you would have to go to version 2, and we already start talking about migration to the new version or some new form management framework. And the second component which we use a lot is form field. Oh, there is a typo. So L is missing. Form field. This is something we created just to encapsulate some of the repeated code which we have to write a lot in Argo UI. And here is some additional information. So basically, not additional information, the details about this component. So first of all, we have component form, and what it gives us, it provides us for free a container for a form state, and form state is just a bunch of key value pairs. And it does for us validation, so it's possible to kind of configure a validation function, and that function, if it returns an error, then form component, it will prevent form submission. So you can be sure that if there is an error, if your function returns an error, user won't be able to click submit button. And next, it kind of encapsulates submission. So if validation is successful and somehow submission got triggered, this function will be executed and it will does whatever you want it to do. So in this case, it's a login. So basically, it's a login form. As you can imagine, it has a couple fields, and the validation is just to make sure that user did enter username and password, and submission is execute login post request. Yeah, so, and it's basically, I think almost every form management framework provides in some way this functionality. But it was not kind of enough for Argo CD because we had that one more very, complete, kind of frequently repeated use case is we want to render the input, and we already have a kind of CSS styles to render inputs, and every input supposed to, we have kind of convention how validation error supposed to be rendered, and we had complaints from users that they didn't like how sometimes we show error too early. For example, if someone landed on a form and that form by default has invalid values, it's a frequent kind of error that input errors could be shown too early before user typed something. So, and basically form field component encapsulates that logic. And let me quickly just describe what's happening here. So we're defining this component first. It needs the link to the form API from the React form framework. And the most important pieces here is that it needs to know which key of the form state it's supposed to modify and how it should modify it. So here we're saying, hey, use text input, and whatever is happened in that text input, it should be stored in username key of the form state. And additionally, it has a label. It's like basically a shortcut for you. It will render a label component on the left side of the input, which is, which we use in Argo CD. So it is kind of very Argo CD specific component, and you don't have to use it. But if you do, it will just save you some, several lines of code. Okay, and basically, I think this part is easier than state management using data loader, because it's just, you definitely can kind of understand what's happening here if you try to create one form. And I guess the most important thing is just to be aware of these two components exist and we use it for form management. Cool. Any questions? Okay. If not, let's move on. This is, I think it's also kind of informative slide. It's basically, it's really hard to learn about that library if you never used it before, but we use it in Argo CD. And I just want people to know it exists and why we use it. So not sure if you heard about reactive extensions, but it's a very kind of popular methodology of event processing. And it exists, there is a library which implements reactive extensions API for almost every language, even Golang has one. And the idea is that reactive extensions, it's a framework which provides a kind of unified way to deal with event streams. And this is an example of kind of what you can do with event streams. So for example, on Argo details page, we have, we need to show the live state of an application, and that the representation of that live state depends on two streams of events. And one stream is constantly changing application state defined by backend, and second piece is user preferences, which are stored in browser local storage. So, and it's kind of basically whenever either of these changes, we need to re-render the page. And that's how you can do it using reactive extensions. So you can say, please combine two event sources. And I just want to do something every time when one of them changes, and I want to use the latest version, of either of them. So, and the data loader supports it, so it's possible to kind of feed that event stream to data loader, and it will execute the render function every time when new event is emitted here. Yeah, and at least based on my experience, I know it's hard to digest it. So, and I kind of, please be aware it exists. And if you want to learn more about it, just Google reactive extensions. It has a lot of good stuff there. And we use that in Argo UI. It helped us a lot. And the reason is, Argo UI, I think we were forced to use reactive extensions even more because we have pages like application details page, application list page, and these pages kind of don't, user don't have to reload the page to get the latest state. It's kind of live, and this is where, RxJS library helps us out. Okay, does it make sense at all?
Yeah, Alex, I just had a small question. So when you say a stream of events from the Argo CD API, so what information does this Argo CD API normally, is it only with regards to the application or like?
I think we have only two APIs. Yes, and it's kind of, API is pretty much just a long pooling, and it uses servers and events protocol. So the idea is that UI can send request once to backend, and that request returns application, JSON representation.
Okay.
And it basically returns a new JSON every time when application changes. So it's long pooling, but browser has native support for it. Browser kind of understands it's the long pooling request, and it uses servers and events protocol. So the key thing is that browser won't try to close that request too long because it knows it's long pooling. And I said we have two events. So two APIs. One API is for application metadata, and second API for application resources stored in Redis.
Okay. Alex, so like I was working on a task where actually I'm supposed to bring up a UI banner that indicate information about releases and stuff. So I should be reading the information from an API, right? So which API should I look forward to?
I feel it's going to be a new API, and I'm pretty sure it won't be streaming API. So basically, I don't think it makes sense to, live show the banner. It would be nice, but the streaming API is expensive. The reason is browser allows up to 6 open connections to one domain name. And basically every streaming API request kind of counts into the 6 limit. And we already used 2. So we had to, so it's basically, you have to have really good reason to use it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would suggest to create a new API, which is just, normal get API, and it returns data once, and the data could be, browser is, there is a, yeah.
Yeah, fine. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. And next, I guess it's the last one. Yeah, so we talked about JavaScript parts, and there is one important decision we made related to styling. So as I said, we use Sass, which is just, it's like a syntax sugar for CSS. Basically, it's a CSS-like language which produces CSS, and it gives you a bunch of shortcuts. Like, for example, here you can generate classes and reduce duplication of, text in class names by using this ampersand. So this code will produce actually 3 classes, and all of them are going to be, so the top one is going to be application conditions class, and these 2 will be prefixed with application condition. yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And I feel like Sass is kind of such a simple library. You don't even have to learn it to start using, because every CSS is a valid Sass code. And as soon as you need a new feature, what I usually do, I just Google or navigate directly to Sass documentation and look if it supports kind of, some shortcut to produce CSS. So that feature which I'm kind of showing you right now, it's called nested classes. And there are several more, like variables. So basically you can have a variable and that helps you to avoid copy pasting, let's say, same color. Actually, there is example of that. Yes, so we use variable right here. And there is also a mixin. You can basically define a group of CSS properties and inject that group of properties into a class. And there are more. So I encourage you to just kind of, as soon as you start writing CSS and you want a way to reduce duplication, just check Sass documentation and you will find something. And the second is BEM. And that's kind of important too. So BEM is just a convention. And that convention explains how to name classes. And the reason is like CSS don't really have any tools for, namespacing. And that's kind of our answer to just avoid naming collisions. So, and it saves you from, thinking too much about how to name your class. So typically we just prefer to use, okay, and then a few words about what BEM is. BEM kind of suggests you to use following type of naming. I think like basically every CSS class might have up to 3 components separated by underscore. I was hoping to find an example here, but it's not there. Okay, so let me switch back to my presentation then. Idea that the top level piece of every class name is name of your component. So application conditions is a good example. So this is a component which can be used by itself. Basically, it doesn't have to be a part of everything else. You can just put it on the kind of top level page and it can render you some data. But application components has elements like conditions. So application conditions has elements, and one of such elements is a condition. And condition is it's like a naturally second level component in this example. So you cannot just render condition outside of context. So, and if you follow BEM, the CSS class that explains how to render condition supposed to be named as component name underscore underscore condition. So, okay, hopefully that makes sense. And the last piece is condition can have a state. So, and in this example, condition can be either warning condition or error condition. And I kept only error condition as example. So basically, class name of a condition for an element supposed to have a suffix separated by 2 dashes. Yeah, and for this, yeah, I know it was terrible explanation. I guess so. It's not so easy to explain, and there is a whole web page which kind of explains the philosophy behind a block element modifier, and it's useful to know because we use it. Basically, each and every CSS file in Argo CD UI follows that condition. Follows that naming convention. So good if you read about it, and so you can just follow it, or if you want to learn more why it's useful, read about it in this URL. Okay, any questions about the Sass and BEM?
Tim, is your question answered? Just checking with you. Are you good with it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. That's it. That's all I had about UI, and I'm going to publish that presentation. I will post the link into the document. So yeah, and we can happy to answer any questions offline. Okay, so let's
Thank you,
go
Alex.
on. Yep. Thank you.
And maybe I can just say a few words about the UI as well. So as Alex mentioned before, we use pretty outdated components and outdated versions of the library, and I think the UI could really use some love. So if there's anyone familiar with all the JavaScript and React stuff, or wants to become familiar with it, so I'd encourage everyone to just give the UI a little bit of love and bring it up to date. That I think that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah,
So if you don't mind me saying, I was just going to say, so on that point, actually, if you look at the Argo UI repo, I have a pull request up to enable strict types in TypeScript. So it's kind of an intermediate step in order to like get everything more updated. It's a large pull request. So if you want me to break that up, let me know into like multiple smaller ones to review. But every commit in that should stand on its own.
I feel like the good thing is that we don't change UI that often. So I think it's even fine to keep this PR, like everything is in that same PR. And basically, because there are not so many UI changes, I think you won't have to merge it frequently. And as Jan mentioned, I think everyone who has UI experience, it would be really helpful if you help with this, review of that PR. And I will try to review it too. But more eyes is better. We will catch more. We'll do a better testing together. Yeah, and I think Jan mentioned that UI is because we have kind of code scanning and dependency scanning, and these tools reported a lot of vulnerabilities just because components which we use, they have vulnerabilities and we have to update them constantly. We tried to update them recently, but it's not done yet. There are still things which can be improved.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff and a lot of work, and some of the versions required that contain a fix might break something, and yeah, it really needs a hand of someone who knows all this stuff well. So, and that's not me. I'm I'm not the UI guy, so sorry. I can't be of much help there.
Yeah, so I actually have done UI for quite a long time. So in addition to enabling all the typing stuff, which will help a lot, the next thing I'd like to do is also then start contributing some tests. Because right now there are basically 0 tests, meaning every single change you have to test manually, which is also why this is going to be a much more difficult change. So we should also start contributing tests with React. It's usually Jest, but if you have an opinion on that, we could use a different, test runner. But I think that would be also a great next step for all 3 of the projects.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay.
Sorry, I have a question. I noticed today that in the dependencies for Argo CD, the Argo UI dependency is just a Git repository. So is there any versioning with Argo UI, or do we always just pick up whatever's latest on master or what?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. I forgot to mention Argo UI. So yeah, this is it's just a library of code, and it has basically a bunch of TypeScript and CSS styles. And the reason it exists is that we share these components and CSS across Argo CD and Argo workflows, so that both kind of look similar. And I think right now we used to version them, and at some point later we realized that pretty much 100% of the time both Argo CD and workflows use master, and that library is pretty stable. So what we do now is basically every time we make a change in Argo UI, pretty much the same. On next day, we just move Argo CD and Argo workflows to the latest version. Yeah, so that's why it is always master. It's just versioning. It's not really, it's like not a library consumed by many consumers. It has literally two consumers, and both consumers trying to use tip of a main branch.
But what Tim just said is, I think it's very valid, because whenever, so now with a huge change coming up, updating all the dependencies, this will not only affect Argo CD but also Argo workflows.
So
I guess.
yeah, it's I guess the choices we have is either try to introduce release process or get ready to work closely with workflow team, because basically every change we make, like last time I made a change in that library, and before merging that change, I created PR which upgrades workflow and uses my fork just to make sure test passes. And then as soon as I ensured the test are passing, then I merged Argo UI changes after the review, of course, and then changed my PR to use latest version of UI. So basically, this is the current state. We kind of just trying to use latest code. And I guess, I don't know, like what else people do in this type of situation. It's like we have a need to share code, and I guess maybe different ways to use Go module, also Git modules. But I guess NPM is just easier.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
You go first, Dan.
All right, so I was just going to say, so the way that I've done this in all of the UI projects that I kind of maintain historically is for something like Argo UI, I would have a separate release process, probably automated using like semantic release or something like that. But then in projects that depend on it, I also then generally have either Renovate or Greenkeeper set up, because as you pointed out, it's somewhat obnoxious to have to go and update the dependency every single time that you make a change. So as much as possible, I try to automate that workflow. But part of the benefits of doing that are right now by pulling in code just from like master, it's a bit of a leaky, I don't want to say abstraction, but like for example, you can't start using new, say, TypeScript versions in Argo UI with also, without ensuring that both of your dependent projects, can actually work against those. Whereas if we actually do build and releases in Argo UI, then what you're shipping is just JavaScript and source maps and typings. So then it doesn't really matter as much, So you're more easily able to like upgrade your own dependencies and all that.
Yeah, and that will a little bit speed up build process as well, so you don't have to build same TypeScript again and again. I agree.
So maybe like a really good intermediate step is keep pulling from master for now, but maybe we get a release process set up. So we start cutting releases, but maybe don't use them initially. And then separately start trying to actually use the releases in, both of the projects that depend on it.
That sounds good.
That really sounds good. And yeah, I think like historically, just Argo never had UI developer and too many UI developers. I guess the only one was me, and I'm not really, now I'm working on backend, and the process which we set up, it kind of works for a small team, but I agree it doesn't really scale. So any kind of these improvements, very welcome. And especially now we're going to have more people who wants to work on UI. So that would be super useful.
Yeah, with the way it's set up right now, since it's still a TypeScript project in the that Argo CD is downloading, every time you build Argo CD, you also have to build Argo UI. So like Daniel's saying, you could separate it into JavaScript and then type declarations, and that is the best way to ship a TypeScript project as a library.
Sounds like we all like the decision, so I think at least this one improvement, we can create ticket for that right away. So I will do it after the meeting.
Yeah, it's a decent amount of work though. The one other thing I was going to suggest that's easy is in the past, we've had projects that pull from other projects' master branches, but that kind of leads to some riskiness every time you merge a big pull request into master, like the one.
Yeah.
A process for kind of making that a little bit easier is to have a development branch or an integration branch, and then every so often sync that branch with master, and that's kind of your release process. It's just much easier because all you're doing is,
So you're saying you kind of have a main branch and stable branch? Is it?
Yeah, exactly. And master is your stable branch, or the naming is whatever, but you have a stable branch and a development branch, and then whenever you feel it's safe, or every so often, every week or whatever, you merge the development branch into the master, into the stable branch.
Okay. In this case, we'll have to have a conversation in the ticket. So now there is.
So I think in general, I've tried to avoid the development branch compared to everyone making a branch, making a peer and pushing to master, especially because after like 10 people have pushed to the development branch, there is again an overhead to ensure that the development branch is in good shape. So if we can have another solution, so that it would be very.
I guess what Tim is proposing is main branch plus stable branch. So basically, the main or master is where your development happens, and then you kind of periodically push into stable, merge into stable. Yeah, but it's the same. It's like what it gives you. I think you can cherry pick, hot fixes into stable. Yeah, and you don't block.
Yeah, a lower barrier for entry, I think also. I'm not sure if that's what I should call it, but if the consequence of that is that the non-stable branch has a lower barrier for entry, then the purpose gets defeated a bit, which means you're no longer continuous. But if we can ensure that everything we commit to, whatever that master or development branch do we call it, is production ready, and that merge to stable is more like cutting a tag or release, that would be good, I would say.
Yeah, that is what I had in mind, Shubham.
Okay. Yeah. I think I think as a quick follow-up on this, Alex or Tim, I'm not sure if you have an issue on this. Let's actually make an issue, put it on a milestone, and that task for the milestone need not be to get the whole thing done, but at least to get the proposal in, have a discussion, and settle on something.
So what is the reason for having like a stable versus a dev branch? If you have something you wanna doing release, we will have like an RC. You're gonna create RC tag for your release anyway, right? I'm not a big fan of having to have so many branches. I think most open source, they have to have the master, and then that's pretty stable for most of the open source projects.
I guess the problem with trying to solve is, make it easier to make changes in master, because now you kind of forced to test all your users before you merge to master, unless you're 100% sure that the change is safe. Yeah, that's the only problem. And if you have two branches, then you it's easier to merge into master, but then whoever is trying to merge master into the stable have to test group of changes. So the benefit is that you do it less frequently. Downside is that it might be difficult, or you might find a bunch of bugs. And so,
it kind of batches the work when you merge into the stable branch less often. It's more work, but you do it less often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think let's move the conversation to a ticket to begin with, and maybe assign it to a milestones that we close out on the proposal.
Yeah, it might take a while before we agree. There are pros and cons of different approaches.
Yeah, I still think what Daniel said is super worth doing. And it sounds like we have a TypeScript, veteran looking at it. So I think that's a really good start.
Cool.
Alex, Tim, do you want to set up a next step for this as an issue that somebody could pick up, just so that we can close the conversation and move on to the next one?
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. So
Well,
Tim, do you want to go ahead and create an issue and move the discussion a little
Sure,
more
I
open?
can do that in Argo UI.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that'll be good.
thank you. Okay. Then next topic we wanted to talk about is pushing images to GitHub container registry. It was proposed by Daniel. I'm not sure Daniel is
No.
here today.
Yeah, no, I'll just give you the rationale behind it. Basically, for those that follow Docker Hub stuff, they started recently implementing rate limiting for unauthenticated and or free accounts. So I know that bit me on some of my own clusters where I started getting rate limiting. Since we do have options and GitHub now has their own container registry, I was wondering what people thought about either migrating from Docker Hub to GitHub container registry or just pushing to both. That way it's not a breaking change for anyone. And then maybe we could like update the deployment manifest to point at whichever one is the most user friendly, whether that's GitHub or Docker Hub.
Wait, did you say they actually rate limit even for
Yep.
basically based on registry? Okay, and I didn't know that. So it may I had the ticket open already, publish. Basically, we thought about that, and I guess we didn't take into account rate limiting, and we only thought it's, they only going to. The only problem is that they may delete image if it's not used, and the rate limit, and that's why Jesse did some evaluation, and he looked at it, and he was like, we didn't have enough of. We didn't think it's that serious. But
so if needed, Daniel, I'm again like it's totally up to the group here, but then we could use Quay.io as well. Just saying.
Yeah.
There are no plans to have
I'm
anything on that, and Red Hat can take care of any extra things that might be needed for maintaining.
yeah, and I stopped sharing my screen so I can open a document. But basically, we track, how many times Argo CD image gets downloaded, and it's downloaded extremely frequently. I'm going to show it one more time. So it could be a real problem. I didn't know there is a rate limit. So this is a graph. It shows.
It went in recently, actually. It became pretty big recently.
Yeah, so it's like, it's around, okay. Basically, it's millions of downloads every day, like around 4 million. Okay.
But is the rate limit, it's imposed on the source, right? So
I think
Right.
the rate limit's imposed on
or is it downloads per repository?
I thought the rate limit was based on the who's downloading it. Like it's rate limited by the
Correct.
IP address that's pulling it.
Okay.
So the way that it works is if you're unauthenticated, it's per IP address, and you're rate limited to 100 polls per 6 hours. If you're authenticated, it rate limits based off of your account identity, and you're rate limited to 200 polls every 6 hours, I believe.
Right.
But the problem with the unauthenticated one is, at least where I work, we're a medium to large size company, so we used up the 100 polls in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. From a CI system, that's pretty common, I would say, even if not humans are doing it.
Okay, I guess maybe I think the best thing we can do is, Daniel, if you can comment in the ticket, and then we'll have to prioritize it, I guess, because we thought about it and we didn't know about limiting. So we
Thanks for bringing this up, Daniel.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next topic. Okay, I think Isaac, I guess you had a question about writing tests for application controller.
Isaac, I think, left saying that he would go in and look at some recording. So we could put it back.
Okay, I think we
backlog for the
can.
next meeting if
Mhm.
these are.
Okay. In this case, we still have 10 minutes. Hopefully, it will be enough for Peter and local CRD validation feature.
Yes.
Unless Peter left.
I think Peter left. I think I saw
Yeah,
that.
I guess that's why he left a message here, so we can talk about. Okay, we'll move both topics to the next meeting then. Okay, and next topic is from Regina, adding documentation about development setup with different clusters.
Yeah, so I added this. I thought that it might be helpful for especially new users when they're getting set up, doing like the setup steps for development with Argo CD to have different steps for using, like setting up environments with different clusters, like K3D clusters or OpenShift clusters. There's currently like not any documentation on this that I could find. I thought it'd be helpful. I wasn't sure if there's a reason that it's not included already. I just wanted to get people's ideas on it if they think it would help.
Definitely. I think the reason why it's not existing is laziness.
Okay.
Perfect explanation.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, that's like fine. I started a couple, installation instructions with like at least K3D and OpenShift. So I could probably set up a pull request to add some documentation for that.
Much appreciated.
yeah, and
The more documentation we have, the better. So
Do people generally use K3D clusters with it, or is it mostly OpenShift or something else?
I feel like a lot of developers use Minikube, and K3D I use mostly for, whenever I need to do something and I don't want to destroy my Minikube setup, I quickly create K3D cluster, do whatever I need in it and then tear it down. And I feel like maybe because of laziness, I have not migrated to K3D completely because it's kind of, yeah.
But I think it's worth having documentation, especially because of the mindshare Rancher generally has in the Kubernetes community. And just
I feel like, and the documentation can help to, share knowledge, because maybe like I keep using myself as example, but I use Minikube because it works, and I maybe don't know enough of benefits of K3S, K3D. So if there was a documentation, maybe it would motivate me to move on and use a better tool.
It's also be useful to have like a Linux and Mac. I think the mileage is different. Depends on like some people have some difficult time with K3D using Mac, but it's really easy on Linux. So I think if you have documentation, probably would be helpful to have for different dev machines. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good idea to add some doc.
As it gets us more contributors who love to use Rancher stuff. So that's also a good thing about expanding.
And I think there's a pretty high demand for that documentation, because I've seen quite a few people asking. They had problems setting up the Minikube or whatever environment, and I think this would be of quite good value.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, and we have 3 minutes left. I don't think we have time to discuss that issue. We'll have to move it, I guess, to the next meeting.
Yep, or Jaydeep, if you want, you could start a thread on Slack as well.
Okay, yeah. We don't have to wait for a whole week till the next meeting. And I can quickly tell you, I read the ticket, I read that issue already, and I know that it's a kind, I mean, not a bug, but it's a valid feature. Like it's like no question it should be improved. You know, and for the people, it's like right now Argo CD UI allows Helm parameter overriding if that Helm parameter explicitly mentioned in values file. If it's not mentioned, you cannot edit, and basically, but it should be possible. You can edit using the CLI, but not the UI. I guess that's, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention, I don't know if everybody who's gone through the issues also read Jonathan's comments, because like I read them and they make a lot of sense and give you context of how it's currently being done with the values field and how that's being implemented in code. So I get how it makes sense in code and how it works. I was just wondering from a UX perspective if that's still worth addressing to make it easier for a user to provide parameters.
I know that from, you know, like users want it. I was able to, you know, quickly understand what is it about because it was asked in the past. But maybe we'll need to, you know, I will jump into the thread and try to. So basically, I know for sure user wants it, and if there are additional questions, I will try to answer in the ticket.
Okay. I can start a Slack thread for this then.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got one after topic if we have a few seconds.
Go ahead.
One of the plans for Argo workflows over the next 3 months is to revamp the user interface for it. And by revamp, I mean add first class support for Argo events in there. Trying to address various use cases where people are using Argo events and Argo workflows together. That basically is going to involve 2 bits of work. One is a migration of most of the UI code out of the existing code base into a new repository, which will remove all the TypeScript, all the Yarn, all the Webpack from that core code base. So it's just Golang and you know, some manifests. And it'd be great to get people's help on redefining some of those wireframes and screenshots for using events in the user interface, because we don't have many people with a very great, you know, the maximum depth of knowledge of the different use cases that people are trying to solve with that. So if people want to get involved with that, obviously join the Argo Devs channel to learn more.
Thank you. Does it mean does it make it even more important to work on Argo UI and, you know, release process, or like some way to smooth contributions?
We don't find any. I mean, if you ask me what our #1 issue is with the Argo UI code base, was the one that you fixed recently, where there was a particular library that did not really support React state updates correctly, which meant you couldn't build like a variety of components. And now that's been fixed, we can build kind of smarter components that are more isolated in the code base. The second issue really is around security vulnerabilities in that code base. It scores very poorly on the SNCC reports. And part of that is, you know, my philosophy on security vulnerabilities is the best way to deal with a security vulnerability is remove the vulnerable code, get rid of the vulnerable dependency. But there's quite a lot of dependencies in that code base that need to be looked at, and it's obviously quite a big piece of work to do that. That's you know, the release process, to be honest, is absolutely fine. I have no issues with it, no problems. Quite happy to take tip of master on a regular basis.
Okay. Any comments about Alex's proposal? Or I guess if you're interested, Slack him in Argo Dev channel. And
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, and we just ran out of time, so I think that's it for today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.